ओम स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्म स्वरूपिणे अवतार वरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः. So this is the sixth talk and today is 23rd December. So we will be discussing the great master as usual. On Thursdays we have started a new series of talks on a very important book, the biography of Sri Ramakrishna, written by none other than Swami Sharadanandji, who was one of his intimate monastic disciples. It's a very authentic biography, as we discussed and we saw in the introduction how this book was written. And in the introduction, Swami Sharadanandji gives a brief account of why great spiritual personalities are born again and again in the subcontinent of India, especially. So, India was in those days practically like a subcontinent with so many princely states held together by the British rule in India. But as a nation, it is only after independence that India became a republic. So before that, it was referred to as Bharatvarsha, and the boundaries were not very well defined. Most of the parts of Burma, Bangladesh, the present day Pakistan, and even some parts of Afghanistan during various rules of various monarchs, both Indian, the Guptas, and also after that Mughals, and during the British Empire, the geographical border kept changing. That is the greatness of India, that it never had any fixed geographical borders, but the culture, the eternal content of her culture, the eternal spiritual content of her culture, it never changed. Whoever came and ruled over them, politics did not matter to the people. That was not our national goal. So that is what Swami Sharadanandji emphasizes, that no matter which political power was in, which political power was ruling India or that subcontinent known as India or Bharatvarsha, it hardly mattered to the spiritual giants whose spiritual life transcended all boundaries, geographical or otherwise, religious, geographical, ethnical, ethnic boundaries, even geographical boundaries were not so important, because these realities which they sought, the spiritual realities, they were beyond time and space. So they were not very particular about the other things, the things of the world as it is known, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say. And as a result, because of this quest, this spiritual quest, by a large number of people, individually as well as collectively, the nation produced some great spiritual giants. Some of them, as we saw in our earlier discussions, became prominent rishis. The rishis also were graded. And then finally, in our culture, we found that it's not the rishis alone that were graded. The Mahapurushas, the great saints, they also came. Later on, they followed, because that was what India was doing since time immemorial. They did not stop. Every time there was some kind of decay in religion, as the Lord says in the Bhagavad Gita, whenever the adharma dominates the dominates society, some prophetic person comes and revives it. That has been happening throughout in the history of the Indian subcontinent. And that's why we have these Vedas, where the authors are practically unknown. Rishis came, They didn't bother about name and fame and other things. But their words have become immortal because they were based on immortal truths. So some of them were called aptas, some in the Sankhya's called them kalpaniyamaka ishwaras because they did not believe in any avatara. But according to Swami Shardananji, these rishis, slowly prominent among them, who were initially considered to be gurus in the sense teachers, spiritual teachers, who had the competence to impart spiritual instructions and experience, not only impart intellectual knowledge of the scriptures, but also give them scriptural experience, give them the disciple scriptural experience. As Sri Krishna promised Narendra that I will not only I have seen God, but I can show him to you. I can make you experience the reality known as God. So that was the conviction that gurus had. And this guru worship we saw in the sixth paragraph of the first chapter, where Swami Shardananji says this worship of the guru was one of the causes of people's faith in the concept of avatara. The word avatara came in the Puranic age, no doubt, but it was preceded some kind of deep respect for the Guru. In the Upanishads, in the Vedas, you will find they were worshipped. The disciples worshipped their gurus because they were the givers of knowledge. Without them, of course, they taught them the way to experience the truths of scriptures in conjunction with meditation. This kind of guru worship convinced the disciples that it was not possible to acquire these types of this spiritual experience without the help of a guru. So they held them in great respect. And there was another fact that people also started classifying the guru. So unless a guru has been endowed with some kind of divine power which can offer realization to anybody who is ready for it, that is another important. Just as there are certain qualifications which qualify the guru, there are a lot of qualifications which a disciple ought to have to get those experiences himself or herself. Whoever approaches a guru has to have certain preliminary qualifications. So Vedanta insisted on both. When there is a ideal guru and ideal disciple, then realization is the fruit of their interaction. That's what the Shastras believed. So Kathopanishad also describes this wonderful truth. So this idea of certain gurus who, compared to other gurus, lesser gurus, they were endowed with some special power and they could bestow unconditional grace upon their disciples and give them direct experience of reality with hardly any effort on their part. So such people, such gurus were considered to be avataras because of their unconditional compassion. These real gurus were worshipped as superhuman beings. And these gurus ultimately were classified as avatars. And the people who came with them, the disciples, who took part in the divine play, as we will be discussing how Sri Ramakrishna played that role to perfection as an ideal guru, and how the disciples, the Ishwar Kotis who came to him. The idea of Ishwar Koti is there in the Sankhya philosophy. We saw that Sankhya and Yoga believes that the people who are perfect by birth, they come with these avatars or this Kalpaniyamaka Ishwaras as they are known in Sankhya. They are the special kind of Purushas who practically seem to rule that particular age. who are the dominant personalities of that age, that particular age. So they were called as avatars. That is the Puranic concept of avatara, so far as the theory goes. Now let us see. So slowly over a period of time, you see, there is a famous saying that a prophet is not respected or honored during his own time by his own people. Otherwise, what can explain the crucifixion of Christ? What will explain the non-acceptance or the rejection of certain prophets during their lifetime? But slowly, even Buddha and others, they were facing so much of resistance. Shankaracharya, for example. So all these prophetic people, all these great rishis, saints, they were misunderstood by their contemporaries. They thought they are ordinary human beings who may be a bit more talented than us, but what is so special? So that is why they say in Ramayana, only 12 people could recognize Rama as an avatara. Otherwise, they thought he is just a son of Dasharatha. So also Krishna's life we'll find, in spite of so many myths and miracles attributed to him, many of them may have been uh, added later to his life. But whatever it is, he was definitely a very powerful personality. And slowly, before he was finally accepted as Avatara, even Arjuna perhaps just considered him to be a friend, philosopher, and guide. He was so close to him, perhaps he had to see the Vishwarupa Darshana, the the 10th chapter, which describes the Lord who showed his real form, an intuitive understanding of what an avatara, what a such a supreme Purusha can do. So these occasional occurrences of avatars convince people that there are some gurus who can be classified as avatars. And the more such avatars started coming and trying to lift people out of their ignorance, the concept become deeper and deeper. So for a long time, before the concept of avatara became deep rooted in the Indian collective consciousness, the prayers like the famous prayer of Rig Veda, where Rudra is worshipped. Rudra can be, later on, the concept of Rudra was converted into the concept of Shiva, one who gives knowledge. That's why he's known as the Adi Yogi, or the Adi, the first guru, the guru of all gurus. He is known as the Adi Guru. So these are different concepts. So the concept of Rudra, or concepts, or maybe facts of experience of these rishis who recited this famous poem from the Rig Veda, so a famous verse from the Rig Veda. He says, the Rig Veda worshipped different natural forces. Finally, they found that there is one great personality who rules over all these smaller gods and demigods. O Rudra, may thy benign face protect us forever. So, if this is a prayer in the Rig Veda to the Lord Rudra, whom they considered as the greatest among all the rishis or the gurus. So they converted, I mean, practically the idea of avatara had its origin in the Vedas itself. One need not come to the Puranic age to establish the fact that such divine personages or people, divine rishis, who were the supreme gurus for a large number of people, who came bestowed with a special power, they were known as avatars. So eventually, these people who worshipped Rudra got convinced that the prayers that they did to Rudra seem to have fructified if that been received, if these prayers or if these meditation, instructions of meditation were received through a guru, a human guru who has, though Rudra was an abstract concept, they said our guru is the Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara. This idea came from that this Rudra is difficult to access. We are praying day and night, but we are not able to conceive of his greatness or benefit, our prayers are not answered. So they feel the compassion of the Lord somehow manifests itself through the human guru, and that concept became deep rooted. So this Guru Parampara, and considering this Adi Guru as the Lord himself, that is why when Sri Ram Krishna was accepted by a lot of people, those who were skeptics, even those people and the great scholars who came to him, the great sadhakas, not just scholars, scholarly sadhakas like Bhairavi Brahmani and Totapuri, they were all great men of realization. Even they saw this uh, aspect of divinity which was far superior to what they could get through their sadhana. Then they found that he is bestowed with these extraordinary qualities, and during his lifetime itself, unlike most of the other prophets who were honored after they passed away. Some of them were crucified, some of them were like Sri Krishna was killed accidentally, no doubt, but it was only as time went by, even Buddha, after 500 years after his passing away, after his nirvana, the movement became a great spiritual movement. It took so much of time. So Swami Vivekananda says the prophet is not honored in his own country or by his own people because they have seen the human side of their guru or their prophet, and it takes a lot of faith or some kind of experience to recognize the divine in a human form, recognize an avatara, to put it in brief. So once the, historically speaking now, Swami Shardananji continues, he says, once the human mind became advanced in the worship of his or her own guru, it did not take them long to identify the guru through whom this divine power became manifest. And the benign form of God whom they were worshipping, the Ishta, had through a strange process given them the connection, like the guru is like a doorway which connects them to their Ishta. So this doctrine of Guru Parampara, this Guru worship, it helped to shape the doctrine of Avatara. That's why Sri Ramakrishna is known in the Ramakrishna Sangha as the Guru Maharaj. The Guru Maharaj means they did not call him by name. Jai Sri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. So all the salutations or the pranams that we do is done not to Sri Ramakrishna by uttering his name. We consider it too sacred to utter his name. So we say Guru Maharaj, or just we call Holy Mother Ma and Swamiji. We do not utter their name. Anyway, that is an Indian tradition. But this Guru worship, so Swami Shardananji says, this extreme reverence for the Guru who enabled you to see the Rudra, who was the Adi Guru in the Vedas, helped you to reach your Ishta. So the doctrine of Avatar, we can see, historically speaking, flourished more in the Puranic age, though its roots extended deep into the Vedic age, which was at least 2000 years before the Puranic age. Now, during the periods of the Vedas and the Upanishads and also the Darshanas, which we are studying, the Raj Yoga is based on the Darshana of Sankhya and Yoga. They are the two schools. There are 6 schools, as you know. The Nyaya, the Vaisheshika. Nyaya is the school of logic. Vaisheshika is the father of modern materialism, you can say. Though Vaisheshika ultimate goal is to reach moksha, but still the Vaisheshika try to explain the universe, try to explain Prakriti and its different constituents. Even Sankhya does that to a certain extent, the 24 categories, the gross and the subtle universe. So many things Vedanta has taken, the 2 schools of Vedanta have taken from this Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya and Vaisheshika. Nyaya is the school of logic, where a lot of importance is given to the spoken word. So the Mantra Shastra has come down to us, the Mantra Shastra or the Guru Parampara, where certain syllables were uttered and you repeat it and you use that as a chain to reach the end of the chain, which takes you to God. That has come by combining all the best elements of Nyaya, Vaisheshika, and all the 6 philosophies. So, gradually, during the period of these Vedas, Upanishads, and then later classical Indian philosophy, we do not know the exact sequence, how they were developed, whether they had roots in the Vedas, these different philosophies, or the founders of these different philosophies, like Kapila, who founded the Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, and all the different systems of thought. People gradually learn about the attributes of God, that is, how God manifests himself in the universe, his actions. What is this law of karma? How do atoms interact with each other? How do people interact with each other? How is karma formed? How are our samskaras, the subtle body? How does our subtle body change? What happens after death? What happens to the subtle body if there is a subtle existence which survives the gross existence after death? What happens to it? And all those things. And how are we connected to this universal concept of avatara, or the Ishvara of the Sankhya, or the Rudra of the Vedas? There are so many concepts of reality. So somehow people gradually, through their own system of philosophy, conceived of reality in different ways. So gradually, but that continued, and the experiments were going on. Just as a lot of experiments are going on in the field of medical science, in the field of technology, when better and better things are discovered, newer things are discovered, certain old things are rejected, certain new things are established when the science progresses. So also India, spirituality was a science. They might have started with the Vedas, though they are eternal, their interpretations went on changing. The classical Indian philosophy was based on the truths of these Vedas and Upanishads. But in the Puranic age, they found that ideas do not satisfy the human intellect. There are a large number of people who want something concrete, some human being as an ideal, some human being as a personal God, or some human being who can inspire them and show them the way. Because they have been used to human interaction. If they wanted to learn science, they will go to school and learn from a teacher. If they want to learn something else, some other art or a craft, they have to go to a teacher, somebody who has experience. So they thought, even for spiritual things, how can we directly get this intuitive knowledge? We should go to some teacher, and this teacher or guru. So guru can be of secular subjects, a guru can be of spiritual subjects. The spiritual guru was elevated to the status of an avatar. So gradually, though in the Puranic age, or though in the Upanishadic age or the Vedic period, rishis followed a different path, which is known as Jnana Marga, or the path of Neti Neti. They were in a hurry, you can say. The Puranic path, the path of an avatara, is a slow progress. It is meant for those people who do not have the necessary amount of dispassion or the desire to somehow realize the transcendental truth. All people are not equally eager. They just want to enjoy themselves. They just want to negotiate this world, see what it has to offer. Only when they are disillusioned, they take up to higher truths. But in the Satya Yuga, as has been described, when these rishis were convinced, like Shukadeva, they were born with the conviction that this world has nothing to offer. They were after the spirit right from their day of birth. So that path is known as Neti Neti. So the moment they saw, it is like, I remember an incident. Some of the monkeys, when we were in our training center, uh, there are a lot of monkeys are in and around Belur Mutt. So they just happen to sit on the trees. And sometimes when we gather to eat certain, uh, we drink tea and have some snacks, They are fond of some particular biscuit snacks. Even they have a choice. We think only human beings have a choice. So it was very interesting to see how this principle of neti neti, one of our acharyas pointed out to us, see how this monkey is also practicing some kind of neti neti, not this, not this. Now, there were several snacks. There were some very coarse biscuits which were manufactured in some of our training institutes. Naturally, they are not professional people, so the biscuits did not taste well. So, along with that, some good biscuits were also there. There was an assortment, and people would be given a few of each variety, because the costly biscuits, of course, in a monastery you can't afford. So some cheaper biscuits varieties were also there. Now these monkeys who came, they had developed a taste for the superior, the better biscuits. So naturally, sometimes out of some of the brahmacharis had that habit of giving the biscuits to these monkeys, and a lot of biscuits would be thrown, not a lot, quite a few pieces would be still thrown around, and this one of these monkeys came down and it took up the inferior quality biscuit. It had tasted it before. So he said, no, not this. So he just threw it. He lifted it but saw that this is not what I want. Then it went on till it got the best quality biscuit. So even though they were monkeys, apparently, they could know that this is something which is good. So that is how the rishis, through a process of discrimination, which is known as Nitya Anitya Vastu Viveka, the discrimination between the temporary and the permanent. So they were trained in that way. A large number of rishis and those who studied in the Gurukula, they were trained to practice this process of neti neti, and self control or austerity was compulsory. It was given to the students, irrespective of the profession you would follow after leaving the Gurukula. The gurus believed that we have to teach them the highest. Now, if they go after temporary things, it is their prerogative. They can decide whatever they want after they finish the Gurukula. But we have to tell them what is the most superior thing to acquire, what is the permanent, what is the temporary. So one essential part of the education, along with secular knowledge, not that all were given these different kinds of knowledge. They were also given knowledge to earn their living. In case some people are not convinced, they said, let us taste the temporary, let us enjoy the temporary, and then when things slip out of our hands, when these temporary things do not satisfy us, then we'll think of the permanent, and then we'll think of Brahman, then we'll think of Nirvana, as it happened in the case of Buddha. And the life of the spirit, very few aspire for that. Every prophet has said that. That's why Jesus famously said, don't throw the pearls before the swine, because it will not understand its value. So that is why the Sermon on the Mount, on which we will be discussing tomorrow, was spoken to a few chosen disciples who followed Jesus, and he knew these were the people who will value whatever he said, and it is not for the masses. So they had to leave the multitudes and go to the top of the mountain. That's why it's known as the Sermon on the Mount. He did not speak about all those things to people who would not understand it, who were not done with the pleasures of the world. So, in the Upanishadic period, they say, according to the history of India, it was a age where a large number of people followed this practice of neti neti. So, as soon as the children went to school, the Gurukula, they understood that these are the things which have temporary value. So we have to be a bit careful and not run after those. Acquire the knowledge, see what is more lasting, more permanent, more eternal, and that knowledge they would select. But of course, some of them would always be there who chose to be happy with whatever little toys they got, whatever little knowledge they got, and they said, let us experience these lower things first. And when we uh, when we realize the transitory nature of these things, maybe after certain blows, then we'll take on, uh, aspire for higher things. Right now, we are happy with our status quo. So it was not compulsory, nor was it possible for everybody to follow this path of, not this. Neti Neti is the path where, in the path of Jnana, which is a direct path, which at least theoretically appears to be a direct path and takes you to the realization of Brahman very quickly. But it's also a very, very difficult path. For most of the people, it is the Puranic path, the path through which you gradually create within yourselves a dispassion or a distaste for temporary things and hold on to the eternal through the concept of Guru and the Avatara. So that before that path, the Neti Neti path was more popular because people did not have the patience to go through all this bhakti and other things. They said, if you know something is valueless, like that monkey who knew this is the superior, this is a better biscuit, I just will not waste my time tasting that useless biscuit. I'll taste the best. So also these rishis, they meditated on the Nirguna Brahma. The question very often is asked, why should we not meditate on the formless God? Why should we accept? Well, if one can do it, that is the path. But that requires a total renunciation of the temporary things right from the outset. So that choice we have to decide. I can't hold on to the forms, the little forms that surround me, and try to reach the formless. You have to give up the forms, however dear they are to you. You have to give up the lower forms. You just can't give up God and say, I believe only in a formless God. That is what Sri Ramakrishna explained, the fallacy that some people, they just boast that I believe in a formless God. That is very fine. But you cannot say that people who follow the path of worshipping the God with form, the Ishta, a image or an idol or anything, they are so inferior to you. A person may detest all sorts of personal gods. He may say, I don't believe in a human God, leave alone the deities. I don't believe any God with any form. I am a scientific person. But they are attached to the forms, they are attached to their sweets, which has a form, they are attached to their objects, the they are attached to people who also have a form. If you have to be formless, then you have to reject all forms. So that shows how the path of Advaita or the path of Neti Neti, which the Upanishads preached, was so difficult. Can we get rid of forms? Can we even imagine that the form of our own form, the body, have we got a kind of dispassion or a disgust for that? If that is the case, Swami Shardanji says, they succeeded in meditation on Nirguna Brahma, the formless God, because they found that there was nothing valuable. They were born with that kind of detachment or dispassion. And then they descended from Samadhi once they reached the Nirguna Brahman and perceived that the world that they see before them is nothing but a manifestation of that same Brahman. Then they could live in the world. Nothing could touch them. The form could not bind them. The form could not imprison them. So, endowed with love and devotion, such people, such rishis, they began to worship Saguna Brahma or God with attributes. They said, after all, why was I, after touching that consciousness, they said the same consciousness is pervading. You can accept form after you touch the formless. And such people, then they reached a firm conclusion regarding his attributes of God, a personal God, his actions, his nature, and believed that such elated human beings or rishis or the supreme gurus can incarnate as an avatara who are by very birth untouched by the world. They have come down. Avatara means to come down. Come down from where? Come down from that high state of Nirguna Brahma and descend to the gross world. But at the same time, having touched that Nirguna Brahma, the formless aspect of consciousness, they can never be imprisoned in this world like ordinary jivas. So that is how the concept of avatara, where such souls who have risen, who have transcended the gross by the process of neti neti, they come down uh, fired by compassion towards the humanities. They see that why are these people struggling? It is very difficult to understand how the difference between the compassion of a human being and a compassion of an avatara. The compassion of a human being for people who are suffering is the reason why they have compassion is that it is a kind of secret fear that tomorrow I will be in that place. You sympathize, you empathize with you cannot say empathize, empathy is something higher, but you sympathize with a person who is suffering because you immediately identify your ego with that person and say that if I were to be in his place, oh, what a suffering it would have been. So your self-love manifests itself as compassion. That is ordinary human compassion. Not that we really care what happens to the others. Of course, some people are very frank. They say, I don't care what is happening. But such people are considered to be very rude. But the fact is, even those who have a little bit of compassion left, it is just because they position themselves in the place of the person who is suffering. And that gives them some kind of fear, some kind of sympathy. And then they say, oh, oh, how much are you suffering? And all those things. Whereas the compassion of an avatar is different. He has transcended. His ego is not there in all his actions. So his attributes, his actions, his nature, they are totally different from that of a jiva. That is what Swami Shardanand is trying to convince us. So this concept of avatara spread during the Puranic age as a result of people's experience of this idea of compassion. So certain rishis, like we saw the wonderful imagery or wonderful vision Sri Ramakrishna himself had. Sri Ramakrishna was compassionate incarnate, avatar of Karuna, as they say, like Buddha and Jesus before him. They were all full of compassion for suffering humanity. That's why they sacrificed themselves. Now, when Sri Ramakrishna saw a vision where he goes like a divine child, where the Sapta Rishis, who had surpassed all the jivas, all the devas also, and they were meditating in that formless region where they were one with Brahman. So Sri Ramakrishna says, I identified those seven rishis. One of them was Swami Vivekananda, and he requested him. He said, I am going down to help humanity. Will you come with me? So normally when people reach the highest, they don't like to come down. But Avatara is motivated by compassion. So there are so many obstacles in the Puranic age. This theory of Avatara became popular because everybody thought this in this Kali Yuga or this age where worldliness is seen everywhere, it is so difficult to even conceive of spiritual things, unlike in the Satya Yuga, where people were endowed with the quality of dispassion, saying neti neti. Their minds were fixed on Nirguna Brahma or consciousness, which alone will solve all our temporary problems and the temporary issues, the struggles that we undergo. So they found a solution and they jumped and they took it and they reached the highest goal. But there were certain rishis or certain great souls who believed out of compassion, decided to voluntarily come down to that is the word avatara means to come down. Avatarana, that means to step down, to come down from a high plane of existence. So though they found that some people were happy, like the Saptarishis, being absorbed in Brahman. That is what Swami Vivekananda said when he asked Sri Ramakrishna, what do you want? Sri Ramakrishna asked him, he said, I want to reach a state where I can just stay in samadhi for several days and then just come down to take a little food, then again get absorbed in samadhi. He really enjoyed that experience of the formless God. But Sri Ramakrishna scolded him. He said, "What kind of person you are? Can't you see the suffering that is how people are suffering because of their wrong ideology, because of their trying to grasp the infinite in the finite things? So you have to come down and show them how after touching the infinite, you can, out of compassion, show them the way, follow the reverse process, the avatarana, then come down and play with them, enact your divine play." That's why this book is known as Sri Ramakrishna and his divine play. So the great master, which is actually a Leela Prasanga, that's why I'm translating it as Sri Ramakrishna and his divine play. That's the little translation of the Bengali book. Though it was translated, because people would not understand, especially people in the West. If you say, "What is this divine play?" They might just compare it to some kind of Shakespeare's play. So that is not the point here. The point is that for them it is a play, but for us who are struggling, it is, though we may be involved in a play, but we take it very seriously. They are like actors who come, who play their part and go back, because they know that they are not the characters they are depicting in the dramas. Whereas we take our drama very seriously. That's why we quarrel. That's why our role, we become identified with the role. If we are enemies on the screen, we become enemies after finishing the play also. But they relax because they know we were just playing these characters. We don't have to identify ourselves. That is the difference between ordinary human beings and the divine beings who consider this world as a divine play. But for us, it is a reality, a very painful reality at that. And not only it is a painful reality, but we suffer on account of not considering our life as a divine play. If we somehow could connect with the divine players and become part of that divine drama, which these great avatars came, the eternal play of Saguna Brahma, if we try to understand this, that is why Swami Shardanand is preparing a background. He doesn't say you just accept Ramakrishna as an avatar, but you see the divine play. See whether you get joy out of it. It's your choice. Just as Sri Krishna told Arjuna, I told whatever I had to tell you. I showed you the Vishwarupa Darshana. I told you all the things that possibly can be told to a human being by an avatar. Now, whether you accept it or not, it is left to you. So that is the eternal nature of the play. So it is very important for those who even aspire to understand the spiritual realities, to understand the divine play of such great prophets. It can be any prophet. I'm not saying Sri Ramakrishna alone performed the divine play. Whether you accept Sri Ramakrishna as an avatar or not, but at least if we accept this divine play and others whom we consider as our ishtas, whether it is Buddha, Christ, or Rama, Krishna, or Divine Mother, there are so many wonderful Puranic avatars, divine manifestations. So we can catch hold of anyone with whom we can identify ourselves. Try to understand the nature. Try to understand the attributes. Janma karma cha me divyam. That is what Gita says. Not only my birth, divine birth, but my divine actions, my divine attributes. As Saguna Brahman, what are my attributes? Why did I conduct this divine play? If you understand that, and if you try to become part of the divine play by associating with that avatara or the Ishta, then that purpose of avatara, the compassion with which he has come, is fulfilled. That is why Swamiji once, one lady in United Kingdom, when he came here to England, somebody asked him, some lady was very arrogantly, she might have made a remark that I don't accept what you say. These are great, apparently You're telling these are the wonderful truths, but I don't accept them. Then Swami Vivekananda immediately retorted back. He retorted. He said, Madam, what I am is written on my forehead. If you can read it, the gain is yours. Otherwise, you will stand to lose. I don't care. That is what Jesus said. Only few people understand the implications, the wonderful reasons why they come and try to establish the world of the spirit among the mortals. They are the immortal people who come occasionally to give us the divine message, that through their divine play, of course, that the world that we are running after is something which is temporary. The name which Jesus gave was Mammon. Sri Ramakrishna gave it a different name, Kamini Kanchan, because that was understood by the colloquial people. Whether you say Kamini Kanchan or you say Mammon, it is the same thing. It means the same thing. Anything that is gross, which is likely to, uh, which is of a temporary nature, can never give you eternal joy. So at some stage of our life, everybody has to feel the transient or get convinced of the transient nature. And the sooner we do, the better for us. But unfortunately, it takes only some people manage to understand that. That is what has been explained in this wonderful chapter. Swami Shardanand is trying to explain to us that it takes the rishis of those Vedic age. For them, it was very spontaneous. They were not uh, people, or they did not have the patience to evaluate or try to experiment with the temporary things that they found, and they just wanted something more eternal, more peaceful, more fulfilling in their life. So to get that, they were willing to sacrifice the smaller things of the world. But in the later ages, the Puranic age as it is known, when people became more and more engrossed in the temporary things, it was difficult to extricate those people. So the Avatara himself had to assume the role of somebody who showed them the path. That is how the Son of God, when Jesus says he is the Son of God, what he means is that he has to voluntarily embrace all the sins, the sufferings, everything that a human being has to undergo voluntarily, willingly, out of compassion, so that people come to know, people can see an ideal before them, how one has to go through all these struggles, and of the compassionate Lord who has willingly assumed a human form for our sake, and then lift us out of our trouble to solve the problems which cannot be solved at the temporary level or the level of the world. So we have to find some eternal solution to our temporary problems. The problems may be temporary, but solving one problem with a temporary solution, which at best can be some kind of patchwork, is not going to help us. So the Lord, out of compassion, the idea of Avatara was this: the Lord, out of compassion, would not like people to be eternally doomed. Eternal damnation, it may be an idea, good idea to put fear into the minds of people, but that is not true. There cannot be a person who will be eternally damned or doomed. That Vedanta never accepts. That is why Swami Vivekananda, when he went his first addresses in the Parliament of Religions, he said it's a sin to call a man a sinner. It's a sin. Why do you speak of eternal damnation? Why do you put so much of fear into the minds of ignorant people who believe in you, and tell them that you are sinners and harp upon the nature of sin? So whoever it is, the avatars came to demonstrate that no matter how low a person has gone in the hierarchy of uh, the human beings, maybe he has gone to an animal level, he in the ladder of evolution, but even he should not lose hope. So the Lord comes for that. So that is the idea behind the avatar of the Puranas, that no matter how low you go, there will be somebody who has the capacity to lift you up. So it's a very, very refreshingly positive message which Sri Krishna, which Swami Shardanji says, India gave to the world the idea of Vedanta, that you cannot be called sinners. You may be going from lower truth to higher truth, but no matter how low you go, there is no point at which there is no hope, where you can say there's no hope for you. Nobody is eternally hopeless or eternally doomed. So rather, the concept of Avatara says the people, this prophetic people who uh, come to save or show the path to humanity, they come incarnate in every age. That is the uniqueness of Vedantic religion, which accepts everybody, every prophet who spoke of the spirit, according to Vedanta, is an avatar. So there is no question of any clash between any spiritual path or religion or ethnicity or nationality. So they are not geographically bound. That is why India was politically united only after the British came. The British ruled India for quite a few decades, I mean, several years. Only after that, they became, they were sort of brainwashed to say that you have to create a political entity to survive, a political or a geographical entity of a nation, that idea of nationhood. But we as a culture, our boundaries never stopped the Indian people from experiencing their divinity. The boundaries were not geographical boundaries. The ordinary human being, the ordinary person in India, or one who was born in the Indian subcontinent as it was known in those days, he hardly bothered who was ruling them, whether it was the Guptas or the Hindu rulers, or even before that, there were so many invasions. There were the Mughals, there were the Dutch, there were the French people, then finally the English. And even today, if you see, these ideas have been imported from the West, the idea of nationhood, the idea of, for a common man, for a spiritually oriented person, he cannot succeed unless he transcends all border. For him, the world is borderless. The idea of borders, the idea of limitations, the idea of exclusiveness, the idea of race, caste, creed, culture, everything limits his all-encompassing vision of the prophet or incarnation or a divine. A really truly spiritual person, according to Vedanta, cannot be bound by any limiting, attributes. He cannot be limited geographically, he cannot be limited politically or ideologically. He has to be as vast as the sky, but at the same time, he has to be as deep as the ocean. That is how Swami Vivekananda described. Normally, when you become very liberal or very broad, the intensity or the fanaticism with which you hold on to your ideology suffers. But Sri Krishna showed the way that you don't have to be fanatic if you are intense in your own faith. You can be intensive, or you can have spiritual depth at the same time. You can have the vastness or the broadness or the scientific spirit which enables you to encompass all. So that rare combination is what Sri Krishna was. It's a rare combination, according to Vivekananda, that he found a personality. He says, my master, the great master, is a wonderful commentary. In fact, these thoughts, the whole book, this biography, The Great Master, in a very abridged form was given to Max Muller. In 1896, I recently saw it's almost, Max Muller wanted, he wrote the first book, English biography of Sri Ramakrishna, his life and his sayings. It was published from Oxford. And he was a great Indologist, as all of you know. And he was a great scholar also. So Max Muller asked for some biographical details. And Swami Shardanand, who is the biographer who wrote this book, prepared a small, write-up and gave it. And practically Max Muller, as he himself has admitted, he just edited that book because he was not aware of the biographical details of Sri Ramakrishna, though he wrote an article, the great Mahatma, and which inspired a lot of Western people to read the life of Sri Ramakrishna. It was Max Muller who initiated this. But when he met Swami Vivekananda in 1896 in his house in 7 Norham Gardens, and it's still there, that house is still there, 7 Norham Gardens in Oxford. So that is the building where he stayed, Max Muller's house. He had a wonderful study and a beautiful garden. So Swami Vivekananda came here from Reading, and Edward Sturdy took him there, and they spent the whole day. And Max Muller was reluctant to part company, so he walked all the way to drop him to the Oxford station before Swami Vivekananda could leave that place. So before that, he had promised him that he will give him some biographical details of his own master, which was he was not so well known in Europe and America in those days. So after Swami Vivekananda gave him the material, which was compiled by Swami Sharadanandji, and later on it was expanded. You can say that this Sri Ramakrishna and his divine play, or Sri Ramakrishna the great master, the two translations from the original Bengali are nothing but an expansion of what he gave to Max Muller, and that book became very popular. It was published in early 1900, or even before that, the late 1890s, the Sri Ramakrishna, His Life and Sayings. So this great master is a wonderful book which explains the biography of a prophet, or a biography of an incarnation, if you may like to use that word, who have appeared amongst us in various ages, in various countries, in various forms, to show us the path to the eternal reality. A reality which does not change, which alone gives you eternal happiness, eternal peace, and eternal fulfillment. So we will continue. If there are some questions, I'll just see the chat. I'm just looking at the chat. If somebody wants to ask questions, they can either raise their hands, or maybe it's a better idea to just type something in the chat box. Tomorrow, as announced earlier in the WhatsApp group, we will be talking on the life and message of Jesus Christ. Tomorrow being Christmas Eve, we will be discussing the life and message of Jesus Christ as explained and understood by Swami Vivekananda, because he was asked when he came to America and then spent a few years in Europe and England, in this European subcontinent. He was asked to speak on the life and message of Jesus, which he willingly did, and his thoughts on that, on not only Jesus but the movement that is known as Christianity, which is supposed to be based on the life and message of Jesus. He gave a lot of talks, and most of the talks were arranged by not only the Anglicans but also the Unitarian Church. Church of England, of course, was there, but some of the Unitarian Church also, which was very popular. They, in Croydon, for example, he gave a series of 7 talks. And then most of the other talks were public lectures, which he delivered in Pimlico, Princess Hall. They were all arranged talks. So based on what he spoke in England and also in the West, in America and other countries, we will discuss. We begin the program tomorrow at 5, and there will be a few devotees who will be singing Christmas carols. There'll be a brief musical introduction, and that will be followed by a talk at say 5:30. 5:30 will begin the talk, and it will end at 6:30. That's on Christmas Eve. And on Christmas Day also, and the day following, all the programs will be announced on the WhatsApp group. Now, There is one question asked by Sharon. Roma Rolla, when did Roma Rolla write? Before or after Max Muller? Definitely wrote after Max Muller. Roma Rolla was a French Nobel laureate. Of course, he got Nobel Prize for his writings. He wrote a biography of Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, and also Mahatma Gandhi. But that was much later. The first biography, it was after Max Muller wrote the famous book Sri Ramakrishna, His Life and Sayings, which was published in Oxford. Whereas Romarola published much later, he wrote it in French. He was a French author and he got Nobel Prize for his French writings, but they were later on translated into English. Romarola is much younger than Max Muller. Near our France Center in Gretz, the place known as Armand Villiers, there is a road which is known as Romarola Road. It's a very small road, but it has been named after him. Any more questions, or I'll conclude for today? Oh, thank you for the Christmas wishes. Some of you have, I convey a very happy Christmas. I wish you all a happy Christmas. Of course, tomorrow we'll be meeting again, and wish you all a very happy and safe Christmas. So I take your leave. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.